354 days. Okay? Now remember when we were talking about the sun. Now, of course, there are different opinions. According to the Word, the sun cycle is 364.25 or 364 and a quarter days, which is why when you look at the solar calendar, according to the world, they say 365 and a quarter days. But even so, ever so often, what you have is called a leap year. So they add that extra month, they tack it on to the end of February, which is 28 days, and every fourth year, matter of fact, 2020 was a leap year, so February had 29 days to make up for that quarter day for the past 3 years. So they just tack on an extra day. So that balances it out. When you think about the creation, one of the things the Most High helped me to see, that it is perfectly imperfect. Okay? Perfectly imperfect, and He said it that way for a reason. All right? Now when it comes to the moon, if the solar year is 364 days and the lunar year is 354 days, ever so often you're going to find that the month, based on how the moon is being calculated, it's going to keep falling back, which is why this year you had some people who started Abib in February, you had some people who started Abib in March, and our congregation, our camp, will be starting Abib later on this month. And hopefully at the end of the lesson today, you'll have a better understanding as to why we will be doing that. Okay? So, a few things just to remind you of. The cycle of the moon. The time period of light is 28 days. So you may be asking, well, where do you get the 29.5 from? Because there's a 36-hour period where the moon is dark, a day and a half. 36 hours. And another point you want to know is that this full moon right here, 36 hours corresponding to the time of darkness, okay, what people refer to as conjunction. Now, some people look at the point, what they believe to be the point of conjunction as the new moon. We don't believe that. We believe that the new moon, according to the Torah, should be counted from the first crescent of light. Not conjunction and not the full moon. From the first crescent. Okay? So keep that in mind. A couple of things we want to go through. Alright. Now, let's go back to Sirach, chapter 43 and verse 6. Now, when you do this, and I want to give this example for the purpose of those who believe that the new moon is the full moon. Okay? And we're going to see another passage in a moment, too, that people go to try to establish the new moon as being a full moon, but in actuality, it establishes what we're about to talk about right now. So, let's say that the full moon, right? So we know that you're going to have to, let's say this was a new moon. And let's say we're in Abib, and we started Abib from the full moon. So let's count 14 days, right? 14 days, you're going to have a dark. You're not going to see a moon. And then on day 15, you're still not going to see a moon. So the question would be, for those who say that the full moon is the new moon, how is the moon a sign for the feast when you can't even see it on the 14th and the 15th? And I specify the 14th and the 15th for a reason that we're going to see momentarily. Okay? Whereas, okay, when you start from the first crescent of light, okay, you count 7 days, you get the half moon. You count 7 more days, you get that full moon. But remember, that full moon is going to be full on both the 14th and the 15th. Because there's a 36-hour period that the moon is going to show its fullness corresponding to the 36 hours that the moon is dark. And then it continues to wane till you don't see it anymore. All right? Keep that in mind. Let's go to some other things. Let me finish Sirach 43, 6-8 again. He made the moon also to serve in her season for a declaration of times and a sign of the world. From the moon is the sign of feast. Now when it says that, it's talking about the full moon being a sign of feast. A light that decreaseth in her perfection. True, the full moon does show the moon in her perfection, but it shows the moon in the perfection for a reason. Then it starts to decrease. Then it says in verse 8, the month is called after her name, increasing wonderfully in her changing, being an instrument of the armies above, shining in the firmament of the heavens. All right? So now let's go to Tehillim, which is Psalms chapter 81, verses 1 to 4. I'm going to read through first. It says, to the chief musician upon Gittith, a psalm of Asaph. Sing aloud unto Elohim, our strength. Make a joyful noise unto the mighty one of Yaakov. Take a psalm, and bring hither the timbrel, the pleasant harp with psaltery. Blow up the trumpet in the new moon, in the time appointed, on our solemn feast day. For this was a statute for Israel and a Torah of the mighty one of Yaakov. All right, so that's Psalms 81, 1 through 4. The focal point that we want to look at is verse 3. This is what people go to try to establish that the new moon is the full moon. But I ask you to do this. Keep in mind what we already read in Sirach. We have said that the moon is the sign of feast. Keep that in mind. Now, the first part of Psalms 81:3, it says this. And I'll read the Hebrew first, then give you a rough translation. Teku ba Chodesh shufar. It says, blow up the trumpet in the new moon. That takes us to another word. This word is number 2320. That word is Chodesh. Okay? Now, this word Chodesh is derived from another Hebrew term, and you can look that up as well. Number 2318. Now, this word is Chodesh. Chodesh. All right? So the term Chodesh, and basically you're talking about vowel points. This means new moon. And then the word Chodesh, it means to be new. Or to rebuild. Think about that. Let me put that under here too. That's an important one. To rebuild. Now, before I move any further, building up on what it says here, to rebuild. Now, think about the phases of the moon. When the moon starts from the first crescent of light, what we actually see throughout the course of this waxing period is the moon being rebuilt till you get to that fullness. Then it starts to wane and decrease in her light. And I thought that was an interesting definition in addition to be new, also understanding that the term Chodesh means to rebuild. Because when you're rebuilding something, basically you're renewing it. So the moon goes through a renewal period. But it starts with the first light, not at the full moon. Let's think logically or reasonably now for a moment. How can we say that the moon is new when we've been looking at it for the past 2 weeks? Whereas when you understand that after this last crescent of light, the moon goes dark for 36 hours, and then you see the light again. Wouldn't it make sense that the new crescent of light would actually point to the new moon, because now the moon is beginning to serve in its purpose to show light or give light to the earth? And I'm just looking at it logically. Okay? The moon doesn't have to be full to recognize it. It depends on the clarity of the skies. It's not hard to see because it's a sliver of a bright light, and stars don't have that pattern. You don't see a grouping of stars so close together that it looks like one sliver of light. You don't see that. But when that light is seen and the sky is clear, because we've witnessed it, it's easy to see. It's not difficult to see. It's only difficult if it's a cloudy night or it's a rainy night. Otherwise, when the stars are out and it's a clear sky, you can easily spot that crescent. Okay? So, being said, we want to read a few not a few passages, but we want to go to a verse. In Bereshit, which is Genesis 29, and verse 14. I want to read this. It says, "And Laban said to him, Surely you are my bone and my flesh. And he abode with him, Chodesh Yamim." Similar to how we read with Yarach Yamim. It says Chodesh Yamim. In other words, a month of days. We want to emphasize the fact that the term is used in connection with days because it is by the moon and the phases of the moon that we're able to say this is the first day of the month and the second day of the month, so forth and so on. Okay? Because you're counting now the phases of the moon. Some may ask, okay, brother, well, if you count the phases of the moon, what do you do when the moon is dark? Well, when the moon goes dark, you know, according to the Torah, when the sun sets, that's the beginning of a day. So you continue to count. And it would be the 29th day. Or it would be the 30th day. Because when you look at a 29.5, sometimes when you look at the Ibri or the Hebrew calendar, sometimes a month is going to be 29 days because they round down. Sometimes a month is going to be 30 days because they round up. Sometimes you may have a month be 29 days 1 year, and then the following year it may be 30 days. Okay? That's why it's important to watch. You see? But what has happened, humanity has become lazy and we became reliant on calendars. We became reliant on clocks. Not saying not to use those things, but when we look at the modernization of calculating time, we lost the ability to pay attention to what is shown to us day after day. Okay? We lost that ability. All right? So, it's time to regain that. Now, the term Chodesh. One, it means the new moon. The day when the crescent moon is once again visible, technically speaking, the moon is renewed when it begins to function for the purpose Yahweh created it, to give light to the earth. Secondly, the term Chodesh can refer to a month, a time marked by 30 days normally. Again, technically speaking, the moon casts a new light each day as it changes during the waxing and waning. Okay? So, when we look at the term Yarach or Yariach, the reason for that word is to show that the moon functions and travels in a prescribed pathway. The term Chodesh, the reason why that's used, because the moon goes through a period of rebuilding, and every day we see a little more light and a little more light. That means that the moon is renewed every single day. Now you have the initial new moon when you see that first crescent of light, but every day afterward, the moon is different. It's a new moon every day, or every night, I should say. Okay? So, let's go to the Midbar, which is Numbers chapter 10. And we're going to read verses 1 through 10. So pay attention to what's being said. "And Yahweh spake unto Moshe, saying, Make you 2 trumpets of silver, of a whole piece, that you shall make them, that you may use them for the calling of the assembly and for the journeying of the camps." So, understand this. When it comes to the trumpets, when you hear the trumpet blast, one or the other is going on. It's time for Israel to gather, or it's time for Israel to journey. All right? Verse 3. "And when they shall blow with them, all the assembly shall assemble themselves to you at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And if they blow but with one trumpet, then the princes, which are the heads of the thousands of Israel, shall gather themselves unto you." So he's now breaking it down, and he's giving you specifics on the type of blast you hear and what's supposed to take place. So when you just got one trumpet blasting, we know we just want the elders, we want the leaders of the tribe to come together. All right? Verse 5, "When you blow an alarm, Then the camps that lie on the east part shall go forward, and when you blow an alarm the second time, then the camps that lie on the south side shall take their journey. They shall blow an alarm for their journeys. So when it's time for Israel to move out, there's a certain sound that you're going to hear, and you're going to know time to move. This tribe go this grouping first, and then the next grouping, and so forth, because it's time to move out. All right, verse 8. Oh, I'm sorry, verse 7. But when the congregation is to be gathered together, you shall blow, but you shall not sound an alarm. Once again, he is specifying the type of sound that the trumpet is going to make and what you're supposed to do when you hear it. So there's a sound that's going to be made that indicates, okay, Israel, it's just time to gather together. Verse 8. And the sons of Aharon, HaKohanim, or the priest, shall blow with the trumpets, and they shall be to you for an ordinance forever throughout your generations. And if you go to war in your land against the enemy that oppresses you, then you shall blow an alarm with the trumpets, and you shall be remembered before YHWH, your mighty one, and you shall be saved from your enemies. Verse 10. Also, in the Simchat, matter of fact, Simchatchem, in the days of your gladness. Then he says, Uv Muadechem, and in your solemn days. When it says in your solemn days, we hear the word Uv Muadechem, or the word Muad, for appointed times. He's talking about in your appointed times. Then he says, Uv Rashi Chadshechem. Uv Rashi Chadshechem. What that means, and in the beginnings of your months. Okay? You shall blow with the trumpets. So he says, in the day of your gladness, in your appointed days, and in the beginnings of your month. Or in other words, on the new moon. You shall blow with the trumpets over your burnt offerings and over the sacrifices of your peace offerings, that they may be to you for a memorial before Elohim. I am YHWH, your mighty one. Okay? So we wanted to read that just to give you an idea of when the trumpets were supposed to be blown. Okay? In connection to what we're reading. We are currently in Tehillim, which is Psalms chapter 81, and we're looking at verse 3. So we looked at the first part, and let me reiterate. The first part says, Tiku b'chodesh shufar. In other words, blow up the trumpet in the new moon. So we see that in Numbers chapter 10, in verse 10, one of the times that you're supposed to blow the trumpet was in the new moon. Nothing different there. But then on the second part, Psalms 81:3, it says, B'chesed leyum chagenu. B'chesed leyum chagenu. In other words, in the time appointed. Now, this word that we're going to look at, chesed, it says, in the time appointed, in the day of our feast. Okay? Now, the word chesed, and this is the term that's causing some issues. It comes from number 3677. All right? Now, the word it says it's derived from another term, 3680. We're going to look at that too. The word chesed, however, it says properly, fullness, or the full moon. That is its festival. Now, the reason why they say that, we're going to see, is that it refers, based on context, to the time when the moon is full. Then it says here, the 15th day of the month. Of course, this is a Strong's dictionary. Well, actually, this comes from the Word Study Dictionary of the Hebrew language, where it says this definition. It refers, based on context, to the time when the moon is full, the 15th day of the month. We know that that's subjective to whoever put that together. Okay, we understand that. Now, excuse me. When it says apparently from 3680, it's basically the same word with different vowel pointing. It's kasa. But this term in 3680 is defined, it says properly to plump. That is, fill up hollows. By implication, to cover. for clothing or secrecy. Okay? It says the active meaning of this verb is to cover up. It is used in a literal sense to indicate that something is covering something else. So, why the connection to the full moon? Because it is during that time that the moon is completely covered with light. We don't disagree with that. Okay? But why was it translated appointed time? And let's address this too. When it comes to the new moon, he's saying two different things here. He's saying blow up the trumpet in the new moon, in the first part of Psalms 81:3, and then it says, in the time appointed, in the day of our feast. When he says that, he's just basically following the same pattern that we found out in Numbers chapter 10, verse 10, where he listed the different ways, or the different times rather, that you're supposed to blow this trumpet. So you're supposed to blow the trumpet in a new moon. You're supposed to blow it on your solemn days or your feast days. Okay? That's when you're supposed to do that. That's all that verse is saying. That verse in no way, shape, or form is an indication that the full moon is the new moon. But it has been misinterpreted as that. That is not the case. That is not the truth according to the Torah. Again, people may disagree with that. Fine. My response to that is to take it to the Most High in prayer. But what was just spoken, if any person thinks themselves to be a prophet or spiritual, they will acknowledge that what was spoken is the truth according to Yah. Period. Okay? So, let's keep it moving. When it says the day of our feast, again, being connected to the full moon, this is a reference to Pesach, which is Passover, Chag HaMatzah, which is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So let's go to Leviticus, or YHWH chapter 23, verse 5. Let's see what it says here. And keep in mind our little pattern up here. When you start that count from here with that small crescent, and you count 14 days over, you come into a full moon. And then the moon is going to be full on the 15th day too, because the moon is going to be full for a period of 36 hours. So for the 14th day and the 15th day, you have a full moon. Listen to what the scripture says. Oh, and before I read that, one other point. If we start the new moon right here and we go over 14 and 15 days, the moon is going to be dark and you're not going to see the moon. And it cannot be a sign for the feast if you can't even see it. Leviticus 23, 5 and 6. It says, Chodesh Hadeshum, in new moon the first. Be'arba'a asar la Chodesh, in 4/10, in other words, 14th to new moon, between the evenings is YHWH's Passover. In other words, in the first new moon, in the 14th day of this new moon, between the evenings is Yahweh's Passover. Okay? Now let's go to verse 6. Ubachamisha Asar Yun, which is, and in 5/10, which is 15th day, La Chodesh Hazeh, to new moon this. In other words, this new moon is referencing the new moon that was spoken of in verse 5. It's the Feast of Unleavened Bread unto Yahweh. 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. So what this is telling us is that on the 14th of the first new moon and the 15th of the first new moon, there are observances that the Most High has commanded us to observe. And the full moon is a sign signifying you're at the right time. So let me shine my big spotlight down on you to let you know you're right on point. That's what this is talking about. This is not the new moon. It's a sign of the feast. But let's continue. Not only is it a sign for Passover and unleavened bread,